Welcome to the deep dive, where we like to really get into the details of fascinating historical topics. I'm Hari, and I'll be your guide for today's deep dive.
And I'm Kimi. I'll be helping to steer us through all the complexities of today's subject.
And today we're diving into the life of Lewis W. Green, a figure who you might not know by name, but whose impact on American education is pretty remarkable. And we're going to explore all of that, starting with his impressive career trajectory.
Well, I think what's immediately striking about Lewis W. Green is the sheer variety of roles he took on throughout his life. I mean, he was a Presbyterian minister, a dedicated educator, and rose to the rather prominent position of college president, not just once, but at three different institutions.
Three different colleges.
Yeah.
Wow, that's quite a feat, especially when you consider that one of those institutions, Center College, was actually his alma mater. He graduated from there way back in 1824.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that connection.
Yeah, and get this, his graduating class consisted of only two people, himself and one other graduate. So you can just imagine what those early days at Center College must have been like a tiny, close-knit intellectual community forging a path in a young nation. It's really fascinating to think about how that environment might have shaped Green's own views on education.
It definitely makes you wonder about those formative years. And it's also interesting to note that his path to those presidencies wasn't exactly a straight line. He actually started out exploring both law and medicine before ultimately realizing his true calling lay in ministry and education.
It seems like a lot of people in those days kind of dabbled in different fields before settling on their true
But
passion.
Right, exactly. And his pursuit of knowledge and theological training led him to some pretty prestigious institutions, too, like Yale College, Princeton Theological Seminary, Hanover College, and Western Theological Seminary. It's clear that he had this deep commitment to scholarship and intellectual exploration.
Yeah, and speaking of exploring different paths, there's a really compelling aspect of Green's story that reveals a lot about his character. When he moved from a slave state to a free state in 1840, he made the decision to manumit the roughly 25 to 30 individuals he had enslaved.
That's a really significant detail, one that's often overlooked in the broader historical accounts of his life. It adds this layer of complexity to how we understand him, raising questions about his evolving views on freedom and equality during a time of intense social and political upheaval.
It definitely makes you pause and consider the nuances of his character and the times in which he lived. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture either. He genuinely wanted to support those individuals in establishing new lives for themselves. He even considered sending them to Liberia to aid in that transition.
Right, and that's an important point to emphasize because it speaks to his evolving views on agency and self-determination. Ultimately, he respected their decision when they chose to remain in the United States and made sure they had resources and opportunities available to them.
So let's shift our focus now to Green's time as president at Hampton-Sydney College, where he encountered quite a few challenges from the outset. The college was facing financial difficulties, and to make matters worse, Green's health wasn't in the best shape either.
It was also a period of heightened tension between the Richmond Medical College and the Hampton-Sydney Board of Trustees, which added another layer of complexity to Green's already demanding administrative duties.
Oh, wow. I hadn't realized there was that added layer of conflict going on behind the scenes. It sounds like he had his work cut out for him right from the start.
Exactly. And, we could spend a whole deep dive just unraveling the specifics of that disagreement and its lasting impact on the college if you're interested in delving into that further. But for now, let's stick with Green's journey.
Yeah, let's stay on track with Green's path, which eventually led him from Hampton-Sydney to Transylvania University during his time there. The institution embarked on a rather short-lived experiment, the establishment of a normal school aimed at training teachers.
It's an interesting footnote in Transylvania's history, and ultimately the normal school's failure was attributed to a combination of factors, concerns about funding, student selection, and a general lack of support from certain stakeholders, which ultimately led to Green's resignation as he had been deeply invested in the initiative.
That's a shame. It would have been fascinating to see how that experiment might have unfolded had it been given more time and resources. But as we've seen with Green's life, these kinds of twists and turns are all part of his story.
Absolutely. And, it raises an intriguing question, too. What were the prevailing attitudes towards teacher training during that era, and how did those attitudes ultimately shape the fate of Transylvania's normal school? It's something to ponder as we move forward with our exploration.
It's a great point, and it makes you realize how these seemingly isolated events are actually connected to much larger trends in American education. A puzzle we'll continue to piece together as we follow Green's path back to his alma mater, Center College, in 1858, where he served as president until his death in 1863.
Wow, talk about coming full circle to think he ended up leading the very institution where he first began his academic journey. And to take on that leadership role during the tumultuous years of the Civil War must have been incredibly challenging, with dwindling enrollment and even Confederate occupation to contend with.
You can only imagine the kind of pressure and uncertainty he must have faced on a daily basis. And yet, despite all of that, and his own declining health, he remained steadfast in his commitment to teaching, preaching, and even filling in for absent professors. It's truly a testament to his unwavering dedication to education.
It's an inspiring example of resilience and devotion, and, as if his career wasn't impressive enough. Green's family tree also boasts some interesting connections to American politics. His daughter married Adlai Stevenson, who later became Vice President of the United States.
Oh, wow. I had no idea about that connection. Talk about a legacy that extends far beyond the walls of academia. It seems we've only just begun to scratch the surface of Lewis W. Green's multifaceted life and impact.
Indeed, and I think as we delve further into the depths of his story, you'll find that his complexities and contradictions offer a unique window into a truly pivotal period of American history. And it's really his story that kind of encapsulates this period of immense change and upheaval in American history. And, his decisions, both in his personal life and his professional life, they really reflect those complexities of that era, I think.
Yeah, it's like we're piecing together a puzzle of 19th century America through this one man's experiences. But we talked a lot about his career, his accomplishments, but I'm curious about the man himself, Lewis W. Green. What was he like as a person beyond all those titles?
That's a great question. And, based on all the historical accounts and records we've looked at, it seems that Green was a man deeply rooted in his convictions. He had this strong moral compass, and I think this is probably most clearly demonstrated in his decision to manumit those he had enslaved, even though it wasn't legally required of him at that time.
Yeah, and to emphasize, it wasn't just a symbolic gesture. He genuinely wanted to support these individuals and help them establish new lives. And as we discussed earlier, he even considered sending them to Liberia to help with that transition, but ultimately respected their decision when they chose to stay in the U.S., and he wanted to make sure that they had the resources and opportunities available to them.
Exactly. And this actually brings us to a rather perplexing contradiction that historians still kind of grapple with today, because later in his life, it seems he acquired more enslaved individuals, which presents this real discrepancy that we have to kind of wrestle with. It highlights those nuances and the often uncomfortable realities of the past.
Absolutely. It's that reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's full of these contradictions and complexities. And even those individuals who made significant contributions to society, even those we might consider, heroes today, might have held beliefs or engaged in practices that we find morally reprehensible today.
It's tough to reconcile those things sometimes, but it's a crucial part of understanding the full picture and acknowledging that progress isn't always linear, and that even those who championed positive change sometimes fell short of their own ideals. And I think that makes it all the more important for us to engage with history, not just as, dates and names, but as a way to understand those forces that have shaped our world.
Yeah, so thinking about all of this, why should we care about this college president from over 150 years ago? What can we learn from Lewis W. Green's experiences that might resonate with us today?
Well, I think there are several key takeaways from Green's story, starting with his unwavering dedication to education and his belief in its transformative power, which are values that remain incredibly relevant today.
Yeah, despite all the obstacles and setbacks he faced, he never wavered in his commitment to foster knowledge and critical thinking. And I think that level of resilience and perseverance is something we can all draw inspiration from, whether we're facing personal or professional challenges in our own lives.
Absolutely. And his willingness to adapt and evolve is worth noting as well. I mean, he never shied away from exploring new ideas, taking on new roles, even when it meant leaving familiar territory behind. It speaks to the importance of being flexible in a world that's constantly changing.
And then there's his courage to challenge the status quo, even when facing potential backlash. His decision to free those he enslaved is a powerful testament to his integrity and his commitment to doing what he believed was right, regardless of the consequences.
It's a powerful reminder that we each have a responsibility to speak out against injustice and to work towards a more equitable society, even when it's difficult or unpopular. And, Green's legacy, although flawed and complex, offers a really inspiring example of how one person can make a difference.
Definitely. And, we started this deep dive focused on Green's accomplishments in education. But it's really become so much more than that. We've uncovered these complexities of social justice issues,
Yeah.
the evolution of American society itself, It's amazing how history can unfold in such unexpected ways, revealing these connections we might never have anticipated.
Yeah, it seems like every time we think we've got a handle on Lewis W. Green's story, we uncover another fascinating detail or another, thought-provoking contradiction. It really speaks to how history is rarely straightforward.
Exactly. And, as we kind of reach the final stage of our deep dive today, I think it's important to shift our focus to Green's lasting impact. I mean, we've talked about his presidencies, his personal choices, his family's political connections, but how did all of that translate into a legacy that we're still discussing, over 150 years later? Right? It's a question that goes beyond just listing his accomplishment. It's about understanding the deeper meaning and influence of his life's work. And I think what stands out to me is that Lewis W. Green wasn't just a man who occupied important positions. He was a man of action, and despite all those challenges, the health issues, the chaos of the Civil War, he never stopped striving to improve those institutions he led, and ultimately to improve American education as a whole.
And while his approach to education might seem a bit outdated by today's standards, his core values, his dedication to scholarship, his focus on developing well-rounded individuals, and that deep-seated belief in the transformative power of knowledge, those principles still feel surprisingly relevant today.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if somewhere buried in an archive there's a Lewis W. Green quote just waiting to be rediscovered and put on a poster. Something like, education is about developing the whole man. Maybe I'm paraphrasing a bit, but the essence of his vision that seems to transcend specific methods or time periods.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something really important there. His vision wasn't just limited to academic pursuits. It encompassed the development of character, moral reasoning, social responsibility, those qualities that prepare people to not just succeed in their careers, but to become, engaged citizens, ethical members of society.
So in a way, his legacy goes beyond those institutions he led or the buildings named after him. It extends to all the students he taught, the educators he inspired, and the ripple effect of his vision for a more holistic approach to education, a vision that I think continues to shape how we think about learning and personal growth today.
But, we also have to acknowledge that just as his life was marked by those complexities and contradictions, so too is his legacy, his decision to acquire more enslaved people after freeing others. It presents a stark contrast to his earlier actions, and it raises these challenging questions about, the limitations of individual progress within a system that was deeply flawed.
It's a reminder that history is messy and nuanced, and sometimes it forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about people we might otherwise put on a pedestal, people we might consider heroes or pioneers. But it's a process that can be unsettling, but it's absolutely essential for a genuine understanding of the past.
And I think that's why it's so important to approach history with a critical eye, to acknowledge both the triumphs and the shortcomings of those who came before us. We can learn from their successes, understand the context of their mistakes, and then use that knowledge to hopefully shape a more just and equitable future.
Well said. And so as we conclude our deep dive into the life and legacy of Lewis W. Green, I think the biggest takeaway is that he was a man of his time, both shaped by its limitations, but also driven by this vision for a more enlightened and just society. His legacy, though complex and at times contradictory, offers some really valuable lessons about the power of education, the importance of personal integrity, and that ongoing struggle to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
I think you've summed it up perfectly. And maybe the most important lesson from all of this is that history isn't just a collection of events from the past. It's an ongoing conversation that continues to shape who we are today. And by engaging with figures like Lewis W. Green, by wrestling with those complexities, we're actively participating in that conversation and deepening our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
That's a great point. And on that note, we're signing off for today, but the exploration doesn't end here.
Yeah.
Keep diving deep into the topics that you're curious about, question the narratives that you encounter, and embrace that richness and complexity of history. Until next time, happy learning.